So next, I've got a couple of quite grisly books to look at. So these are film books again, and I'll start with this one. And I'm just going to double check that I can show you the cover of it, and it's not too violent or has any nudity on it or anything like that. But this is Nightmare USA, and it's very heavy, by Stephen Thrower. It's the untold story of the exploitation independence. So it's a book about the sort of exploitation films from the 1960s and 1970s. I think it might even go up to the 1980s. But this is, again, there's a theme. There's a theme with these books, and that they're exhaustive and definitive. And I'm not even sure I can flick through this. I will attempt to film myself looking through the pages of this book, but I suspect that some of the subject matter of this is quite grisly. But for someone who's interested in films and interested in a particular type of film, this is a treasure trove of recommendations. And I've been have had so many really remarkable films put on my radar through this book. I can't remember what led me to get it. I think Stephen Thrower does a commentary on the Arrow Video Blu-ray of a film called The Witch Who Came from the Sea, and I think that's what the title of the film is. And it's mentioned in this book, The Witch That Came from the Sea, or Witch Who Came from the Sea. And it's a remarkable film, because one of the things about exploitation films is that they're not always what they appear. So what seems like a very lurid film, what the title suggests, a lurid supernatural film, but it's actually a really sensitive film about mental illness, and extraordinarily done. It has a really interesting use of language, and when you look at it kind of head on, it can look quite wooden. The acting can look quite wooden, and the dialogue can look quite stiff. But I think it's actually part of what makes the film interesting, the film's aesthetic. It has this kind of odd aesthetic which matches that theme of a person who can't connect to the world because there's something, just an innate part of them is hurt, and they're processing that hurt, they're processing that trauma, and it's transforming the world around them in a very scary and terrifying way. And there are so many films like that in this book that you could write off as puerile, as trashy, as schlock, but they're actually really interesting and creative and different. And so this hefty book, Nightmare USA, is another treasured possession. And next, by the same author, and I really don't know if I can film myself flicking through this. I don't even know if I can show you the back cover. The front cover is going to be quite scary, so I do say prepare yourself. And there are some prints. For some reason, there are some flowery prints inside this book. I forgot I had these. They're inside this book. Very incongruously when you see the cover. So this is Beyond Terror, the films of Lucio Fulci. Again, this is by Stephen Thrower, and Stephen Thrower is an excellent writer on film and film history, and a particular type of film, so exploitation films. Lucio Fulci, Italian film director, I think started his career in the 1950s. He started with essentially kind of like rock and roll films, musicals, biker films, slapstick comedy films, caper films. He was a working director. He was kind of a journeyman director initially. And his career, if you track the career of Lucio Fulci, as much as this is kind of focused on his horror output, if you track the career of Lucio Fulci, you see the development of the Italian film industry during the post-war years. So you start out with these rock and roll films, with these pop films, with these kind of comedy films, and then in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, he moves into the giallo, and the giallo, which I guess Mario Bava really initiated. Mario Bava brought the giallo to the cinema with The Girl Who Knew Too Much in 1963. But Dario Argento in 1970, when he made The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, really sort of kicked the doors down in terms of making the giallo a kind of signature genre for the 1970s. And Lucio Fulci was sort of right behind Dario Argento. He came out with films like A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, which is one of the best giallo films, Don't Torture a Duckling, Seven Notes in Black. And then as the giallos started to wane and the industry started to move towards more violent films, but more, I guess, what would later be termed video nasties in the UK, you know, cannibal films, zombie films, you see Fulci move into that arena. So this image on the front of this book comes from the poster for his film Zombie Flesh Eaters, which is a fantastically lurid title. In Italy it was called Zombie 2 because they sold it as a sequel to George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead, which was released in Italy as Zombie. So Zombie 2 was a very cheeky attempt to cash in on the success of Dawn of the Dead. But then because Dawn of the Dead wasn't called Zombie in America or in the UK, they had to come up with a new title, so it became Zombie Flesh Eaters, which is one of the great lurid titles in cinema history. And then he made films like the Gates of Hell trilogy, so he made The Beyond, City of the Living Dead, and House by the Cemetery, which are these deliriously violent, deliriously stupid horror films. But he also made interesting stuff in between. He made Conquest, which is a kind of sword and sorcery film. He made, what was it called? Contraband, which is a Policici film. It's one of his most violent films, actually. It's incredibly violent and incredibly depressing. But it's not, it's like, he did westerns as well, like Four of the Apocalypse and Massacre Time. And it's like he always kind of, whatever genre he did, he kind of made them horror films in a way by making them deliriously violent and disturbing. But this, again, I've used that word several times now, is a definitive study of Lucio Fulci. A very contentious figure, I guess, in Italian cinema, but an interesting figure in Italian cinema. So we have another book about another Italian film director. And this is a director that I mentioned just shortly in the context of Lucio Fulci. And this is Profondo Argento by Alan Jones. I'm not sure if this is still in print. I'm sure you can still get copies of it, but I'm not sure if it's still in print. I got this a long time ago. I got this in 2008. And this is about the film director Dario Argento, who, again, kind of revitalized Italian genre cinema in the 1970s when he made a series of giallo films. Now, giallo are essentially murder mysteries. They're essentially very violent murder mystery films that draw on the influence of books like The Screaming Mimi, and draw on the influence of really the whole history of kind of mystery fiction. So everyone from Agatha Christie to Sherlock Holmes stories, but done in the context of kind of lush 1970s Italy or somewhere in Europe. There's a lot of there are giallos that are set in London, like A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, and what have they done to Solange? There are giallos set in Spain. There's even a giallo set in Ireland. I think The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire is set in Ireland, is set in Dublin. But they're these sort of deliriously violent murder mysteries. And Argento elevated that subgenre to a high art. So as well as Bird with a Crystal Plumage, he made Four Flies on Grey Velvet, he made Deep Red, and then he pivoted into supernatural films. So he made Suspiria, which is one of the classic horror films of the 1970s. He then made Inferno, which is a sequel to Suspiria. He then went back to giallo and made Tenebrae. His more recent films, or his later films, aren't as well respected or well thought of as some of his classic earlier films, and probably with good reason. But I still find things to like in some of them. Even his more recent film, Dark Glasses, I thought wasn't great, but it was kind of interesting. And it was nice to see him come back, and nice to see him do something in to see what he does with his formula in a modern style. But I think his last great film for me was Sleepless from 2000 or 2001 with Max von Sydow. I think that was his last great film. But this is, Alan Jones is an Argento super fan. He's also a really interesting guy in his own right. He was a punk. He was associated with Vivienne Westwood's shop Sex in the 70s, and he was friends with people like Jordan and people like Steve Cook. He was part of that whole sort of that punk set around bands like the Sex Pistols. And now he's associated with Fright Fest, and he's a great film critic and a great author. And this is a fantastic book. Again, definitive, exhaustive. And because I've had this for so long, it's a treasured item. It's managed to survive. We've moved a lot because of the rental market in the UK, and it's hard. It's very difficult to get on the housing ladder now. So if you're under the age of 40, you're pretty much consigned to renting for your entire life, unless you have very rich parents. So we've moved a lot, and somehow this has managed to survive. And it's not mold damaged, it's not scarred with age, it's managed to survive. So a treasured item. Next is another book that I haven't taken the plastic off. And I got this for Christmas. And it's The Real and the Romantic. It is English Art Between Two World Wars by Francis Spalding. And I was thumbing through this in the shop in the Tate. And it was incredible. And it's so treasured. I'm too afraid to take the plastic off it in case it gets ruined. But I thumbed through this. I spent a long time in the shop looking through it, to the point that I kind of had to ask for it as a Christmas present. And just, it's got a painting on the back, and I saw this, you can see the phone reflecting like that. I saw this in the Tate, the actual picture, and it was so fantastic. There was something awe-inspiring about it. It reminded me of the film Metropolis by Fritz Lang. There was something about that, and it just to see it for real, not just here as a print, but to see it for real was really remarkable. And it's got so many fantastic paintings in this book. And again, I really need to open this. I can't keep putting off taking the plastic off it. So maybe if there's any demand for it, I'll open this one, and I'll open the one about the Casablanca School, and I'll do videos on them if there's any interest in people in people wanting to see these books. But this is another treasured one. You can always tell they're treasured if you don't want to take the plastic off them. You want to protect them for as long as you can. I know that's very precious, isn't it? Trying to keep your books protected. I watch a lot of Paul Mars's videos on YouTube, and he talks about how you should really, take your books around and really break the spines and thumb the pages. They're meant to be enjoyed. They're meant to be they're meant to have a life. They're meant to travel with you. I don't know what it is that I try and protect my books. I think maybe, I don't know, we didn't have a lot of books when I was growing up, so it is a kind of, and again as well, the books cost a lot of money now, don't they? And if you don't have a lot of money, you really have to kind of, they become like precious, don't they? They become this precious thing that you have to look after. So I want to end with a fun one, of a treasured book, quite a fun one actually. I think this is the last one before I wrap up. I don't think there's any other ones that I wanted to look at. So this is The Secret Agent's Pocket Manual, 1939 to 1945. And this is just a fun little book that has... It's kind of a recreation of what you'd suspect a spy would be given during the war. and it's got survival tips in it, and it's got things about bomb making, and it's got things about, you know, disguise kits and incendiary cigarettes, and, you know, how to conceal things. It's just such a bizarre little artifact to have, and it's apparently compiled from authentic documents as well. And it's one of those things that it's such a sort of fun novelty that when I saw it, I had to get it. And I was writing a spy book at the time. I never finished it. I never finish any of the books that I start. I kind of lose momentum on them. But I was writing a spy book, and so I wanted to learn a bit about spycraft. I wanted to learn some of the tricks and tips about how to disarm a soldier. How do you disarm a soldier? You know, you don't know these things. Someday I might write that spy book. I wouldn't hold your breath. It's on my list of things that I've started and never finished, and it makes me very sad that I don't finish projects. But it is what it is. You know, I'm lucky if I get any bits of writing done and any bits of writing finished. So I'm going to end with this video, with the Secret Agent's Pocket Manual, a treasured book. A fun book, a book that I quite like taking off the shelf every so often and having a look through. And it's always interesting and amusing. So this will probably be quite a long video, even if when I cut out all the guff, it's going to be quite a long video. So if you've stayed with me through this video, I just want to say once again, thank you very much. It's always very much appreciated. You know, it's extraordinary that anybody watches these videos. So if you've seen any of the books that I've talked about and you have any thoughts or opinions or, you know, anything, a personal story connected with these books, do drop them in the comments, because I really am interested in what people think about the books that I read and the books that I like. And I'm also really interested in what people have in terms of recommendations for books that you think I might like, or books that are meaningful to you. What are your own treasured possessions in terms of books? What are the books that you kind of sort of reserved as like sort of special treatment, or the books that you would protect with your life if you had to, if such a thing even exists? What are the books that you find yourself taking off the shelf sort of every week or every so often, and just re-looking, rereading, re-experiencing the magic of those books? So once again, thank you very much for sticking with me through this video, and I'll hopefully see you again soon. Thanks again.